This video is sponsored by SIDEQUEST Annual 3. How do you handle your combats when your players want to recruit NPC allies for the fight? How do you change your approach when they want to bring 1 or 2 allies versus a whole group of like 5 or 6? Do you adjust your combat by introducing other minions for the allies to fight, or just bring the allies into battle? How do you adjudicate that many people in combat and the fact that the more allies they recruit, the easier the fights become? That's what we're talking about today. This video was commissioned by one of my patrons, Florian. Patrons who support me at $50 a month can actually choose a subject they'd like to see me cover in one of my videos. Also, you don't have to stay supporting at that level the entire time. You can back me at $50 once and then drop back down to like $1 or $2, maybe $3, but you know, you don't have to stay at the $50 range. You can cancel your pledge entirely. I'll still make the video if you at least back me once at that level. So if there's a topic you really wish I would discuss on this channel, consider signing up for my Patreon at the Project Image tier, and we'll make that happen. Now today we're going to talk about how to handle NPCs when your players recruit them for a battle, but what if you want 12 brand new iconic NPCs to introduce in your games? Or maybe you want more than 20 new monsters or more than 30 new magic items? Well, too bad. That sucks. Sorry, I can't help you. Oh, but actually, I do know where you can find those things. You can check out the sponsor for today's video, the Kickstarter for the SIDEQuest Year 3 Annual. SIDEQuest is a fantastic monthly zine that provides inspirational 5e content for game masters and players alike. It's the brainchild of Icarus Games, a fantastic role-playing game company, and, fun fact, a fellow DungeonTube channel. And honestly, Anto from Icarus Games is one of the most supportive voices in the hobby. I have truly been so impressed every time I've ever interacted with him. And this project brings together SideQuest issues 25 through 36 in print for the first time in a beautiful hardback book. And through this Kickstarter, you'll have options to pick up the previous annuals as well. There are fantastic locations, new player options like the Formless Ancestry and the Ranger Conclave of the Dread Hunt, new factions your party can join with or fight against, world-building articles about things like developing your world and making deals with the devil, GM advice about things like pricing magic items and new mechanics for contagions, and more. And I know what you're thinking, this deal couldn't possibly get better than that. Well, you're wrong, because there's an early bird reward. Kickstarter backers who pledge during the first 48 hours will get an early bird discount on their pledge. And this discount carries over for when the project unlocks stretch goals, so you won't lose out on the discount if you back early before all the stretch goals are available. This is the 3rd SideQuest Kickstarter, so they know what they're doing. In fact, their last Kickstarter delivered the book only 4 months after the campaign, and if you've backed a lot of Kickstarters, you know that 4 months is an insane turnaround. I'm not guaranteeing 4 months again for this one, but I can tell you that these folks really know their stuff, and so you can trust that you're in good hands. So check out the link in the description and back the Kickstarter for the SideQuest Year 3 Annual to bring a bunch of awesome new material to your game. And thank you so much to Icarus Games and the SideQuest Year 3 Annual for sponsoring this video. A quick note before we continue. This video does contain some very minor spoilers for Curse of Strahd. I'll try to be as vague as possible, but I have a ton of examples from this campaign for this topic, so be aware that I'll be referring to a couple of locations and a couple of NPCs, though I won't be referring to the NPCs by name. Also, this video contains spoilers for the 1999 movie The Mummy, so if you haven't watched that movie, go watch it right now, because it absolutely owns. So if we're talking about the best practices for bringing NPC allies into battle, the first thing we need to do is establish a baseline. Why might your players recruit NPC allies for their quests? Well, there's the obvious answer that they might just feel like they need a little help in a big boss fight. It's pretty common, at least in my experience, that your players will feel outmatched by a big fight and want to stack the deck in their own favor. And this is kind of a great sign for how your campaign is actually going, because it means you've done a really good job of making your players feel the significance and importance of the fight ahead of them. That's not always easy to do, and so if your players do feel like they're outmatched, then that tells me that you've properly instilled a sense of dread into them. Additionally, if your players feel like they can call upon other potential allies and recruit them to the cause, that's also a great sign that they're invested in the world of the game. They're thinking about the motivations of their allies, they're building alliances with NPCs or factions, and they're considering the world you created when counting up their assets. However, there are some instances where the party maybe isn't thinking of the game quite the way you might like. Sometimes the players ask NPCs to join them in battle because they feel like, well, we're the heroes and what we're doing is important, so everyone else should really drop everything they're doing and help us out. And this is an extremely common mindset for players. After all, there are absolutely exceptions. This isn't true of every campaign, but generally speaking, a lot of modern D&D games are about the heroes trying to save the day. Maybe they're trying to save an NPC, or save a town, or save a kingdom, or save the world, or save the multiverse. But regardless of the scale, a lot of modern D&D players want to feel like heroes. And the reason I can so confidently claim that this is the case in so many D&D games is because that's the trend in published adventures. It's the tone of most actual play shows, and even fantasy fiction overall has largely moved in this direction over the past few decades. The most influential fantasy anything to come out in the last 20 years was Game of Thrones. And even in that show, where the characters are all scrambling for power and backstabbing each other for control over a kingdom, Jon Snow's subplot was literally, I'm trying to save the world and that's more important than what anyone else here has going on, so it would be really great if you could all drop what you're doing and help me out. And ultimately, when your players are feeling this way about the world and the other people in it, it can be understandable, but can still lead to friction between you and the other players, and we'll make a video in the future breaking down some of the ways you can approach this problem in your games. Now, it's reasonable to say, hey, maybe some of our NPC allies can help us. After all, I talk a lot about Critical Role on this channel, and we're entering an era of the Vox Machina campaign where it's going to become more and more rare for the party to enter a big combat without at least 1 or 2 NPC allies at their side. However, sometimes the act of recruiting NPCs can become disruptive. And if we're talking about Critical Role, then probably the most infamous example came in episode 27, when Tiberius tried to recruit Draconia's air force of Wyvern Riders to join their mission to kill the vampires in Whitestone. And ultimately, Matt Mercer had to put his foot down. Not because he couldn't have figured out how to handle these extra NPCs in battle, although it would not surprise me at all if that was at least a factor. But the bigger issue was that, essentially, Tiberius hadn't earned that level of loyalty from these NPCs. Now, I've had similar issues present themselves in some of my games, where a player will try to recruit a group of NPCs to the fight, especially some faceless squad of NPCs, like soldiers or something like that. And I always used to write it off as the same problem. These players aren't treating the world of the game like a real place. They're just trying to use these NPCs as assets. But I think it's unfair to assume that's always the motivation behind your players trying to recruit a bunch of NPCs. The truth is, there are a ton of factors that might lead a player to keep going to the let's recruit everybody tactic. Like I said, there's the fear of a powerful enemy, or the feeling that you're a bunch of important heroes and nothing that anybody else has going on could possibly be as important as what you're doing right now. Not because you're viewing them as NPCs, but simply because the threat is so large that it logically makes no sense for anybody to not want to help solve it. There's also the possibility that the game has progressed to the point where the heroes have just gained a lot more influence or more people under their command. Once Vox Machina liberated Whitestone, of course, Percy the Lost Prince could call upon the city's help every once in a while. However, in that same campaign, we also saw how main character energy can present an issue, so even the fairly understandable act of recruiting allies can be tainted by the way the players actually go about it. When the Vox Machina campaign began, at least when the stream started, the players had just saved the life of the Emperor and his family in a pre-stream game. And whenever anybody challenged their authority or just asked them to do something they didn't want to do, they immediately used their status as saviors of the Emperor as a bludgeon to try to escape accountability. And so eventually it was inevitable that the Emperor would call them on it, in the hopes that they would stop acting like everyone in the kingdom always had to drop everything they were doing just because Vox Machina said so. Unfortunately, Sovereign Uriel was under a vampire's mind control at the time, so the heroes didn't really learn the lesson they should have, and then shortly after that adventure, a bunch of dragons conquered civilization. And at that point, it actually did make sense that anyone Vox Machina tried to recruit really would want to help them in battle. And so Matt had to start figuring out what to do when his players recruited allies, because it no longer made sense that this is something they would not be able to do. Sure, sometimes it would take some extra convincing, and that means there's a chance of failure. Some allies have to be recruited with negotiation. For example, Vox Machina tried to recruit the Thieves Guild, the Clasp, to help them out in the aftermath of the Chroma Conclave attack. And that negotiation wasn't even about the final fight with the dragons, it was just an alliance to trade information and resources, just to establish a baseline relationship. And the negotiation fell apart, and Vox Machina essentially burned all potential goodwill they had with the Clasp. But had the negotiation gone better, if they'd rolled better persuasion checks, or had a better offer, or if any number of things had gone differently, then they could have arranged a situation where they had allies in all sorts of respects, including potentially bringing them into battle. Other times, allies can be recruited if you do them a favor first. We just covered the Feywild arc of Critical Role, and so we saw the party liberate some werewolves, and as thanks, the werewolf leader agreed to follow the heroes and jump into battle when they faced the final boss of the story arc. And other allies are just longtime friends, and they will absolutely come along when Vox Machina calls on them, or will sign up because the cause is also really important to them personally. We saw that right at the beginning of the Chroma Conclave storyline, when the party recruited Lady Kima to help them track down the first vestige, and we're going to see that happen a lot more as we get deeper into the Chroma Conclave arc, and the party starts calling in the big guns. Now, all this, and we haven't even talked about how to use these NPCs in battle. For example, what sort of stat block do you use? You want something that will be easy to use, won't get in the way of the fun, but will still offer fun options. And this is probably something we'll only touch on today because it really needs to be the subject of its own video, but the question is, do you make a full character sheet for an NPC ally, or use one of the NPC stat blocks from the monster manual, or use the sidekick rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, or something similar to that, like the retainer rules from Strongholds and Followers? Again, more on this another day, but for today's purposes, my short answer is, use whatever makes the most sense for you and your group, but I personally recommend not using a full character sheet since it usually has way too much information for you or the other players to track during combat. That being said, sometimes when you need an NPC stat block in a hurry, I can understand how it might be faster just to grab your phone and create a character in D&D Beyond in just a couple of minutes. That's a habit I've fallen into before, and it's one that I'm working really hard to try to break going forward because it really does make combat a lot more challenging. You want something that's going to be easy to use at the table, and unless you're a player like me who knows the game extremely well, using a second full character sheet is not the easy solution. Also, for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that these NPCs are not wildly overpowered. They're around the same power level as the heroes, or maybe even a tiny bit weaker. However, this can be kind of a crapshoot. First of all, judging balance is always tough in D&D. These classes are not all equally balanced against each other at every level, and the game itself isn't balanced assuming you're bringing NPCs into battle with you. And this doesn't even factor in the pre-published adventures where a potential NPC ally might be wildly overpowered. For example, in Curse of Strahd, one of the potential NPC allies the party can recruit is a powerful monster hunter, and she has way more hit points than the rest of the party for most of the campaign. She has way more attacks than the player characters, and her abilities deal a ton of damage. Now, this probably isn't an issue if she only joins the party for the final fight against Strahd, since you can assume the party will be somewhere from 8th to 10th level, and the disparity won't be as extreme at that point. But in my game, she tagged along for a mission or two when the party was around level 4 or 5, and she put all of them to shame. She fully left the other adventurers in the dust. And in future Curse of Strahd campaigns, I would definitely adjust her stat block so she doesn't outshine the other adventurers quite so easily. And she's not even the only potential ally where that might be an issue. One of the other NPCs in this adventure has actual 9th level spells. So if the party happens to recruit him, you gotta figure out how to make that work without allowing him to completely overshadow your players. But again, for the purpose of this video, we're going to assume these NPCs are at least close in level to the players. After all, this is a discussion around how to bring NPCs into battle without making the fight less fun. We have to at least agree on a baseline that these NPCs shouldn't be wildly overpowered compared to the players. I am working on a video about high-level NPCs. You'll probably see that video sometime next year, but, little spoiler alert, I'm not going to recommend you bring them into battle with you. That ends up being broken more often than it ends up being fun. Now, for my current Curse of Strahd campaign, the party has picked up a whole bunch of NPC allies. Probably more than I should have allowed. In the future, I wouldn't have that many as part of the party all at once. I would handle things a lot differently. But I made it a lot more manageable for myself by delegating the running of these NPCs to the players. I have 5 players and we have 5 NPC allies, which was more or less a coincidence, but also some of these NPCs are connected to specific player characters. So in some cases, it very much serves the story. And so each player is responsible for running one of these NPCs. The Barbarian runs the Monster Hunter because they're girlfriends. The Cleric runs the Elf because I made them blood relations. The Monk runs the Brutal Enforcer because she's the one who took pity on him and sought to rehabilitate him, and so on. However, shortly after I handed these characters off to the players, we switched from running our games in a more Theater of the Mind style to instead using Foundry VTT. And suddenly it was a lot easier for me to handle these NPCs in battle than it had been before. So in some of these encounters, I just controlled the NPCs myself because it was faster and easier for me to do so. Additionally, when I'm controlling the NPCs, it's easier for me to control how powerful they are in combat, since, like I said, some of these NPC stat blocks are more than a bit more powerful than the player's powers, and if I'm running the NPCs, then I can choose for them to simply not use certain abilities that I've ruled out because I think they're overpowered. But regardless of whether the players control the NPCs or you do, this would still be my rule of thumb. You definitely shouldn't have more NPCs in the party than you have player characters. And in fact, in the future, I don't think I'd want that many NPCs in the party altogether. Although I might be willing to make an exception for the final fight, which is the case for our campaign currently. That's what the party has gathered all these NPCs together for. But they've also rolled with a large crew of NPCs for a few of their missions. And in the future, I would scale back on that a lot. But we'll discuss that some more later in the video. We'll talk about how to maybe make sure your NPCs don't always agree to join the heroes in every battle, which is something that I struggle with a lot in my games. However, it also does make sense for your players to try to recruit as many NPC allies as they can, right? They want to stack the deck in their favor. They're hoping having some more bodies on the team will give them an edge in the fight. And generally speaking, that is largely true about D&D 5e. Anyone who's tried to pit a D&D party against a solo monster or thrown a dozen kobolds at a party has probably learned pretty quickly that the number of combatants can have a huge effect on who's going to win that fight. However, there's also a world of difference between bringing just a couple of allies into battle and bringing a larger group of 4 to 6 allies into battle. And so we're going to discuss the multiple approaches I can think of for how to handle your combat difficulty when the players bring NPCs into battle, and I'll discuss 2 scenarios for each option. Either the party just brings 1 or 2 allies into battle, or the party brings a whole group, like 4 to 6 NPCs. However, I have one rule of thumb for whenever an NPC joins the heroes in a fight. An NPC cannot kill the big bad boss. Sure, NPCs can kill minions, and maybe even a particularly nasty lieutenant, and in fact sometimes handling that lieutenant is the perfect way to keep those NPCs occupied, and more on that later. But they cannot kill the dragon, or the lich, or the vampire lord, or whatever, because I think it's fundamentally unfun for an NPC to steal a kill from the heroes. I think it's a letdown. Additionally, I put a lot of energy into building animosity between the heroes and the villains, so it's usually far more cathartic for the heroes to get the kill. If an NPC gets the chance to kill the bad guy, that has the potential to rob the entire story arc of all the drama and catharsis I've been building up ever since the villain was introduced. So whenever an NPC does enough damage that would theoretically fell the villain, that villain is going to drop the next time a hero lands a hit, because I would rather the heroes get the experience of killing the bad guy. I don't need a DM PC to charge into battle and kill the monsters I control. That's not why my friends agreed to play the game. And it's not why I play the game. I'm the DM. I can kill the bad guys whenever I want to. Just killed Tiamat. Just killed the Demogorgon. There goes Orcus. See? It's easy. I don't need a character to add to the party to get that experience. I can do it all I want. Now, if you've watched a lot of Critical Role, you might be thinking of a couple of iconic moments where Matt Mercer did have an NPC kill the final boss, and it was awesome and cathartic and iconic. But let's look at those 2 moments. One of them we've already discussed in my Critical Role Demystified series, and it was adapted into the first season of the cartoon, so we can talk about that one pretty openly, I think. But the other example is from Campaign 2, and I'll discuss that one without spoiling any specifics or plot details. Let's talk about the first example first. At the end of the Briarwood arc, Cassandra DeRollo, Percy's sister, executed the necromancer Delilah Briarwood. And so there we go. We've got an NPC killing a super important villain, so clearly, it's fine to let this happen in our games under any circumstance, right? Well, not so fast. First of all, this wasn't in combat. It happened during a role-playing scene. Second, here's the order of events. The party neutralizes Delilah but doesn't kill her. Then Vax grabs her, slams her against the wall, and tells Percy to kill her. Now obviously Vax could have just slit her throat himself, but he didn't. He offered that opportunity to Percy. So already we have a situation where it's not just important to this party that the villain dies. Specifically, it should be Percy who takes his revenge. Delilah came from his backstory. He's the PC who has suffered the most at her hands. So if they're not at the heat of combat and they have the freedom to control the situation, then he should be the one to get the kill. And then Percy turns to his sister Cassandra and gives her the opportunity to execute Delilah. Because while Percy might be the player character who has suffered the most at the hands of Delilah Briarwood, Cassandra was stuck in Whitestone under the Briarwood's thumb for years while Percy got to be a heroic adventurer. She has certainly earned the opportunity to claim her revenge. This is also a really important moment for the rest of the party, because they don't trust Cassandra. She has already betrayed them once in service to Delilah, but she was also brainwashed and manipulated for years, and Percy's trying to give Cassandra the opportunity to fight back against her oppressors and reclaim her life. You could also argue this is the only thing Cassandra could do to make the party trust her, so now, not only is Matt inclined to allow Cassandra to kill Delilah to help rebuild that trust with an important NPC, but the entire party is watching and waiting to see whether Cassandra will give in to her years of brainwashing or choose the side of her better angels. So for a lot of reasons, this was a very special circumstance. And this is not something that Matt makes a habit of. Typically, his NPCs don't get a chance to kill the bad guys. But again, there is one more big exception. I'm going to discuss this without spoiling any details, but in Campaign 2, the party was able to recruit an ally into a really big important fight. And this is a brutal fight, and things were not going well for the party. Eventually, a moment came where the NPC ally was one of the only characters still standing who wasn't unconscious or at least severely injured. But at this point, the NPC also had the opportunity to do a lot of damage, enough to kill the bad guy. And when that happens, you can see Matt muttering under his breath, well, I don't want to do this, because he does not want one of his NPCs to kill the bad guy. Like me, that's not why he creates these NPC characters, and that's not why he runs this game. And once again, if you're not completely sure that every player at the table would be okay with a non-player character getting the killing blow, don't let it happen. But by this point in the fight, the players didn't care who killed the bad guy, as long as somebody killed the bad guy. Recruiting this ally had also not been easy, so allowing the NPC to get the kill would still be a form of reward for these players. It's a payoff for all their hard work. So all the players start chanting, "Do it! Do it!" And for the first time in more than 200 episodes, Matt Mercer allows an NPC to kill the big bad boss in combat. And you know what? Just so you can be sure that I'm interpreting this correctly, we're going to watch this clip. I'll cover up or edit out any spoilers, but I want you to see exactly how uncomfortable Matt was with allowing this NPC to get the killing blow, and how his players specifically convinced him to do something he didn't want to do, and I suspect break one of his unspoken rules, because just this once, it actually was going to be more fun for them if he let it happen.
Okay. That's going to finish his turn. Is going to attack.
Come on, come on!
Yeah, you are, aren't you? I really don't want to do this.
Yes, you do! Just do it!
Come on, come on.
That's 25 to hit.
Yeah. Come on.
But it's not a sneak attack because no one
Everybody's
is
dead.
Everybody's dead from it.
What about the gorilla? Is engaged with it.
10 feet reach.
And technically, yeah,
I mean,
10
he
feet.
also would have.
Yeah.
He's not going from far away. He's on top of it.
No, that's true. That's true. I'll allow it.
Matt's gonna kill one of his own characters.
Come on.
Glad we shamed you into this.
Say it.
Yes!
Say it. Say it. Say it. Say it.
How do I want to do this?
Friendship. It was killed with the power of friendship. That's the
In this example, there was absolutely no doubt that everyone on the party was on the same page. Plus, as Taliesin shouted, this was a testament to their ability to recruit a friend, someone who, if memory serves, was initially very much not inclined to help them. And if I were in a similar situation and there was absolutely no ambiguity about what the players wanted, I think I'd do the same thing. So, now that we've covered the basics for why and how NPC allies work when you recruit them in combat, let's answer Florian's question. What are the different options for handling combat difficulty when your party brings NPC allies into the fight? That's right, this video is just starting. The first option is that the NPCs fight alongside the heroes in the main battle, and the combat is completely unchanged. You don't sideline any of the NPCs or tie them up fighting other minions or do anything to put your thumb on the scale. You run the fight exactly the way you were always going to, and you don't make it any harder to adjust to the new NPCs added to the fight. This is by far the easiest option. It takes the least amount of work on your side. And there are two fundamental virtues to this approach. First, it's fair. I don't know how you personally feel about adjusting encounter difficulty on the fly, or fudging hit points, or even fudging your dice rolls, but honestly, none of that matters if you just run the fight the way you initially planned to. Second, it rewards the players for recruiting their allies. If a fight is just easier than expected for no apparent reason, that can be anticlimactic. But if the fight is easier specifically because the party spent a chunk of the session, or maybe even more than one session, trying to recruit some NPCs to come on the adventure with them, then that is a way to validate their choices. After all, they made a sound strategic decision, and as a reward, the combat itself is not as difficult as it would have been without these allies on the field. However, there's an obvious pitfall to this approach. Like I said, this could make the combat easier than you want. Now, whether or not this matters to you depends a lot on your philosophy toward D&D, and the experience you're hoping to present to your players. Do you want to run a game where every encounter is dramatic and intense, and the big battles are always life and death, survived by the skin of your teeth roller coasters? Or is your game the type where the players can potentially reduce or even neutralize the challenge ahead of them with careful planning, and they don't mind if the final fight is not dramatic if it means that they outfox the villain? Notice this isn't just a discussion of your individual style as a GM anymore. We're also discussing what your players want from the game. But this is where you need to be careful, because what the players say they want and what they actually want are not always the same thing. Like, of course your players will probably tell you that if they're recruiting allies for the fight, they want those allies to make a big difference in the difficulty of that fight. And that might actually be true. I don't know your players. It's possible that an easier fight that they earned by bringing their allies together is going to be satisfying and rewarding for them. But it's also possible that once that fight actually plays out, it'll be easier than they expected and they'll feel let down by that. We've said this before, but when left to their own devices, players will optimize the fun out of the game. But it's also possible that some players won't feel the same way. For them, they will be happy and satisfied that the fight isn't that hard, either because they don't want their character to die and an easier fight makes them feel safer about that, or because they do enjoy the feeling of stunting on your big boss fight. If you're playing a video game, let's say you're playing Pokemon and you have a really powerful Pokemon, like a Charizard, and you go around just frying Magikarps in one single hit, is that fun? Well, it depends. For some players, yes, absolutely, because it demonstrates that you've essentially beaten the game. And in D&D, there are absolutely some players who do get satisfaction out of a fight that is really easy, specifically because they made smart choices in advance. But for other players, that's not at all why they play D&D. And so for them, a fight that feels noticeably easier, even one where they earned a victory through smart tactics, might still feel like a letdown. Now, I can really only recommend this approach under a couple of circumstances. Either the players aren't bringing more than one or two allies into the fray, or you're expecting the fight to be really difficult already. With one or two allies, I don't think you could generally expect the fight to go that differently, though, again, that's assuming the NPCs are around the same power level as the heroes. But if your players are bringing 3 or more allies into combat, then the only reason you don't need to worry about the fight being easier is if you're already expecting the encounter to be pretty deadly. For example, let's look back at my Curse of Strahd campaign. They brought a bunch of allies with them when they went into the Amber Temple. I think they had 4 or 5 NPCs with them for that quest. But they were also severely underleveled. And they knew that. I'd given them a lot of warnings and indications that this dungeon was going to be brutal. That's why they recruited so many allies, so they would have a decent chance. And even still, it was a bloodbath. If I recall correctly, all but one of their allies had died within the first couple of encounters. It was wild. Similarly, at the time of recording, they're about to go into their final Strahd encounter. You know, whenever I get the chance to carve out enough time for that final session. I'm working on it, but I'm a new father. It's a little bit challenging. And they're rolling up on Strahd with another collection of powerful NPCs. But I've known that was a possibility for a long time, so I adjusted Strahd's stat block quite a while ago to make the fight as challenging as I could whenever this time eventually came. Although you could actually argue that choosing a more powerful stat block, because I knew they'd probably recruit a lot of allies, actually falls under our second approach. The NPCs fight alongside the heroes, but the boss fight itself is still harder. Maybe you give the boss or the minions extra hit points so they can last longer. Maybe the boss's attacks deal more damage. Maybe you give the boss a more powerful AoE attack so they can catch NPCs and PCs alike in the blast. Maybe you just give the boss an extra legendary action or some high level spells. But the point is, you're putting your thumb on the scale a bit to raise the tension, but you're not making any major changes to the encounter. Heck, a lot of these changes could actually be made in the middle of combat without prepping them in advance. If it's looking like the fight will be over in less than 2 rounds, you can just double the boss's hit points so the fight lasts a bit longer. It's not a major change, but it will give you a bit more time to make the fight more exciting. Or while we're on the subject of changes you can make in the middle of combat, maybe you focus less on upgraded stats and more on specific tactics. Maybe the monsters focus fire on the NPC allies, trying to knock them out of the fight. Or maybe they focus specifically on the player characters, so the NPC allies have to jump in and play defense, but the fight is still focused on the players. Or maybe there are even more strategic options you can employ to help keep the fight exciting without fully sidelining the heroes. Regardless of whichever method you use, this might be a good idea for a couple of NPCs, but if you've got a squad of NPC allies in battle and your players really want them fighting alongside them during the fight, this is practically a necessity. However, it's also possible that you just want to keep the big bad boss fight focused on just the player characters, so you want the NPCs to stay occupied with the minions, so the heroes can feel free to keep their attention on the boss. But what if you didn't plan for there to be any minions in this boss fight? Or what if there were only going to be a couple and they weren't going to be significant enough to keep the NPCs occupied? Or you don't want to take them out of the situation the players are going to be interacting with, you still want them fighting the players, so you don't want to set them off to the side for the NPCs. Well, you could just generate some new minions and have them fight the NPCs themselves. That way, they're still in the fight and they're still contributing, but they're not disrupting the battle that you had planned for your main characters.
Who the hell are these guys? Priests. Imhotep's priests. All right then.
Now this one is tricky. It's kind of high risk, high reward. On the plus side, it's pretty cinematic. Think of an action movie where the heroes fight the bad guy, but all around them, two other factions are also fighting. The Pirates of the Caribbean movies do this a lot. Our heroes fight Davy Jones or Blackbeard, but meanwhile the side characters are all fighting all the bad guy minions, and it's extremely cinematic. On the other hand, the idea that you created extra villains to combat the heroes the NPCs recruited is very contentious. Some players have no problem with this at all, but others hate the idea that the fight has been rebalanced to essentially take away the advantage they feel like they've earned. Or they might resent the idea that you're just inventing bad guys in the moment in the first place. After all, if you can just conjure baddies whenever you want in any scene, then how can their choices matter? This is very similar to the debate around the Quantum Ogre, which describes the idea that it doesn't matter which path the heroes choose in the dungeon, the ogre you prepped for them to fight is waiting at the end of whichever hallway they go down. Some players, and some DMs, really do not like this idea at all. Others just shrug and say, look, all this is imaginary anyway, so what does it matter whether I made this up before the session or during the session? And I'm sure some people fall somewhere in the middle, or maybe judge things more on a case-by-case basis. But the point is, we're not going to solve the Quantum Ogre debate today, because your individual feelings on that subject depend a lot on your priorities in D&D, and the specific reasons you enjoy playing role-playing games. However, this is a reason why some players might be totally cool with the idea that you're inventing minions for your NPCs to fight, while others would really resent this idea. Now, whether or not these minions were literally invented just to counter their NPCs, and whether or not you tell them that, but I would recommend you keep that detail under your hat, they don't need to know. But your players should at least still know what's going to happen when the NPCs enter the battle. Because here's the thing. There have been two separate occasions in my games where a player really wanted to recruit some allies for the big final boss fight. But they didn't just recruit one or two named allies like a local fighter or a wizard they knew really well. Instead, they recruited groups of faceless allies. In one case, the player was a rogue of around level 15 or 16, and it was just a one-shot, so we decided that they were in charge of the local thieves guild. After all, it probably wasn't going to be a big deal, right? But then, right before the final fight, she went to her guild and recruited the best fighters to come along. Okay, well, yeah, I didn't think of that. So when they arrived at the dungeon, all the henchmen of the bad guy were waiting outside, ready to fight. And so the rogue's lackeys charged into battle with the henchmen. The other example came at the end of our Prince of the Apocalypse campaign, and once again, given the huge threat the bad guys posed to the entire region, the players were able to recruit a small squad of local soldiers to join them in the battle. But when they entered the dungeon, I had the soldiers get tangled up battling all the evil henchmen and monsters and other critters that the heroes hadn't managed to kill the last time they were there, leaving the heroes free to fight the big bad. And in both those cases, I didn't create any of those henchmen for the purposes of fighting the NPCs. They had all already existed in the dungeon. The heroes had specifically not managed to kill them the last time they were there, so the players theoretically would have known that there were minions on the field. But don't get it twisted, I would absolutely not be above creating some NPCs to engage their NPCs in combat. I'd do it, I just didn't have to that time. But still, even though the players knew these minions had existed prior to them recruiting some allies, the players who had been specifically gung-ho about recruiting NPC allies were disappointed with how things played out. They wanted the NPCs to join them in the big final fight. But I had a choice. We could either roll dozens of attack rolls between the good guy henchmen and the bad guy henchmen and deal with each individual room of the dungeon and actually calculate all the attrition and play out these encounters, or I could just have the NPCs charge in and say, "Go! We've got this!" And not only is that more cinematic, but it also provides a tangible benefit to the party. They're clearing a path for the heroes. Now the heroes can charge through a relatively empty dungeon rather than facing off with every single room full of bad guys in a sequence, all in a row, before they can even reach the boss.
Save the girl. Kill the creature.
What are you waiting for? Get out! Get out!
But once again, in both cases, at least one or two of the players felt let down that they weren't getting the effect they wanted from the NPCs. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, come on, what did you expect? Well, past Mike, they didn't know what to expect because you didn't talk to them about it, in or out of character. So there are two ways you can help manage your players' expectations when they recruit allies to the cause. The first is for the characters to engage in a discussion around tactics, and present the idea that they won't be in the fray in the final encounter, but will instead be handling the bad guys' minions. There's also the opportunity for you to use these NPCs to help establish the existence of the bad guys' minions if you haven't already foreshadowed them, so it won't feel like they're coming out of nowhere. Maybe the players can be talking strategy with the NPCs, and one of them can deliver some exposition. I've read the ancient texts. It is said the Lion of Rot never travels alone. He draws demons and gnolls to his presence. We should expect other enemies besides just the great beast in that cave. Or maybe it's something like, you know, this vampire did not choose to make his lair in this temple on a lark. Legends say that in ancient days, 3 paladins broke their oath to the god and butchered innocent people, and as punishment they were buried in iron coffins beneath the temple. We should expect that Lord Castigaire has exhumed them and revived them by now. But also, talk to your players out of character. Find out what they're hoping will happen and see if they're open to you adjusting things. For example, you could say, rather than try to handle the marching order of your NPCs in the dungeon alongside you, I like to try a more abstract approach to handling them in battle. Maybe they can go and deal with some of the other henchmen, and that way you won't have to fight room by room. We can just cut straight to the final boss fight because your NPC allies have cleared a path for you. And feel free to try it a few different ways throughout the campaign. You don't have to stick with just one approach. Hey guys, last time I was the one who ran all the NPCs in battle, and it was a nightmare. Does anyone want to run these NPCs in battle for me? If not, then I think I'd rather handle them narratively and have them deal with other threats in the dungeon rather than have them fighting alongside you in battle with the Sararak. And then you need to listen when your players tell you how they feel about it. Because each approach has its pros and cons, but how much the pros outweigh the cons, if they even do, will depend a lot on why each player might want to bring an NPC ally into the fight. Now, in fairness, with some of these examples we've discussed so far, we're getting very close to the concept of just having armies fighting each other, and that is a whole other topic, and it is one we'll discuss soon. However, in any example where armies fight, you handle it off screen, and you either make some rolls to decide who wins, and again we'll talk about that soon, or you just decide which side survives based on how the main fight goes. For example, if Vox Machina beats the Briarwoods, then the rebellion in Whitestone overthrows the evil nobles. If Vox Machina falls in battle or has to retreat, then the rebellion failed, and the tide of undead soldiers maybe didn't kill all the rebels, but certainly enough that the rebels were forced to scatter and retreat, just like the heroes. But when you're handling NPCs battling minions, it can, and should, work a little bit differently. Now, when my patron Florian suggested this topic, they mentioned that no matter how many NPC allies their party recruits, they always have them fighting other minions just off-screen. And while I don't think that's necessarily necessary if there's just 1 or 2 allies, like, as long as they're not wildly more powerful than the heroes, they could probably join the fight with the final boss themselves. But I definitely do think that sidelining them is the right approach if you have more than 2 NPCs. And to be honest, if you have even just 1 or 2, but they're just going to fight minions anyway and not be involved in the main boss fight, then 100% just keep them off-screen. You're making exactly the right call there. But Florian did ask, since the NPCs are fighting the minions off-screen, do I think their group is missing out on anything by not having them fighting those minions in initiative, on the battle map with the heroes? Let me just say, absolutely not. If the NPCs are helping out in the fight against Strahd or Thordak or Orcus, that's one thing. Well, Orcus died earlier in this video, but you know what I mean. But if they're not fighting the main boss and they're specifically fighting some other enemy, like Florian said they were, then you should absolutely keep them off the field and don't worry about tracking their actions in initiative, even if they are literally still in the same room as the party. I just listed off 2 examples where I essentially sidelined the NPCs by having them deal with other minions. And while the nice benefit of that was that they could help deal with the bad guys' henchmen who hadn't been killed yet, the honest reason why I did that was because I did not want to roll for initiative for a bunch of other characters in combat. Sure, for my Curse of Strahd campaign, that's different. These are beloved NPCs who are specifically there to join in the fight with Strahd. But if Strahd does manage to summon some extra minions that the heroes haven't killed yet, and there are a few of those still in play, then it's entirely possible 1 or more of the NPCs will break off from fighting Strahd to go deal with that. Because quite frankly, it is so much simpler to just reduce the number of people in initiative, so you don't go crazy. And you've got a good excuse. You can narrow your focus on the PCs and the big bad boss they're fighting, and not worry about tracking anything else besides that. If someone has to retreat and they go looking for the NPC in the other room or go upstairs and find them, then sure, reintroduce them. Maybe the fight is still going on, or maybe the fight has just ended and the NPC was on their way back to reunite with the heroes anyway. But again, if they're not facing off against the core enemy and you don't expect the minion fight to be important to the players, just get them off the field. You could even say that they're still in the room and the players can see them fighting in the background, but still don't track it in initiative, don't track damage. Maybe just throw in a detail about them at the end of every round, but just for flavor. You see Strongheart and Warduke dueling in the corner, their blades crashing into each other. Okay, top of the round, Eric, it's your turn. Then at the end of the next round, maybe add another little detail. You hear Strongheart bellow as he drives his attack forward, and he and Warduke keep dueling, walking up the stairs as they go. Or you can just put them in a separate room, and then tell your players how they fared after the fight. However, while I do think the fate of an army should probably be the same as the fate of the big boss fight, I don't think that's necessarily the case for NPCs. Quite frankly, if your NPCs charge off to go deal with the henchmen by themselves, they should probably live.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, if you've got a big group of NPCs, I do think it's fair to say that maybe one or two of them fell in battle, but I don't think I do this for the most important, beloved characters. I've got no problem killing off NPCs in most circumstances, but when the players couldn't do anything to save them because they were busy fighting the main bad guy, I don't necessarily want to punish them for that by saying, you know what you should have done is instead fight every single minion and clear every room and then brought your NPCs into battle with the big boss. Because that's exactly the behavior I'm trying to avoid. I don't want my players doing that. And so killing off all the beloved NPCs off screen would probably send the wrong message. Now, if there is a situation where it's literally impossible for the NPC allies to have survived, okay, yeah, let them die. We don't need to reprise at the end of War of the Worlds here. If a character apparently exploded, they should probably stay dead. Although that being said, Ardith Bay seemed to explode and he was fine. So, I don't know, I'm sure this depends a lot on the tone of your game. Personally, I think in a D&D game full of wizards and clerics where your characters are all high-adventure heroes, it's possible for your NPC allies to survive something that seemed lethal, but they should either be severely exhausted, injured, both, or maybe they lost some people on the way back. But while this is something that I feel strongly about for my own games, it's also something that I could be easily convinced would not be the right approach for your own games, depending on the tone. If you like the idea that life is cheap, then you could probably just roll a d20 for every NPC to see if they live. Treat it like a death saving throw. 10 or higher they live, 9 or lower, they didn't make it. But if you're going to do that, then I would also do the same thing for the bad guys they were fighting. After all, it's one thing for a beloved NPC to die killing a minion. They both went down together, it's poetic and tragic. But it feels even worse when that minion comes around the corner, wiping the blood off their sword, and you realize, oh, crap, our favorite cleric died. Again, maybe that works for you, maybe you like that. But once again, consider the message that sends. Do you want to discourage your players from recruiting NPCs for big boss fights in the future? Because be aware, that might be the message you're sending when you do something like that, especially if you do it a lot. Of course, something else to factor into the question is what to do with the NPC's resources. How many hit points did they lose? If the NPC's a spellcaster, do they have a lot of spell slots left? I would do whatever you can to avoid tracking an NPC's hit points and spell slots during a fight, especially if they're not even joining the heroes for the big bad boss fight. So a good rule of thumb for me is that a spellcasting NPC ally probably lost about half their hit points and half their spell slots during whatever fight they just had. Ideally, they should lose at least one spell slot of each level of spell they can cast, unless the NPC is specifically saving a high-level slot to help the players with a predetermined plan, like saving it to help them all teleport away or something like that. Now, if the PCs barely survived the boss fight or they were forced to retreat, and you want to capture that same feeling for the NPCs, then consider depleting most of their spell slots, maybe just leaving one first level, one second level, and a third level, something like that. But I admit that this all sounds pretty arbitrary, so maybe instead you should roll for it. Roll a few dice that would be equal to half their hit dice, and instead of healing that much, they take that much damage. And obviously they don't spend any hit dice, they weren't spending that resource. We're just using that as a good frame of reference for what their hit points kind of look like. Then roll a d20 and they lose that many spell slots. For example, if you roll a 10, go through the list and cross one spell slot off. They lose a first level slot, a second level slot, a third level slot, a fourth level slot, a fifth level slot, a sixth level slot, and then that's their max level slot. So you go back to first, they lose another first level, another second level, another third level, another fourth level, and that's 10. You're done. Again, is it as logical and clear as rolling a full combat between the NPCs and the evil minions? No, of course not. But unless you have a whole lot of time on your hands between sessions to roll full encounters that don't actually involve the players, then I don't think it's remotely worth it to actually try to track exactly how the fight would have gone. Just ballpark it. Figure out how injured you want the NPC to be and how depleted on resources you want them to be in order to really sell the seriousness of the battle they just fought, or just roll something very basic so you can capture a very rough approximation of how many resources they've spent. Now there is one last thing we should discuss today, and that's how and when to limit the use of NPC allies in your games. I talked a lot about Critical Role today because my style is really similar to Matt Mercer's, and because if you watch my channel, there's a decent chance you're also a fan of Critical Role. But something I've noticed is that Matt is actually really good at not having his NPCs accompany the party on every mission. The party will recruit one or two allies to join them for a fight against a big boss, and then afterwards, if the party asks them to come along to the next big mission, the NPC will probably say, "No, that was a lot. I don't think I could do that again, at least not right away." Now, that does not mean that Matt prevents them from recruiting other NPCs for the next fight. Part of the fun of high-level D&D is that you do potentially have allies you can call on for help, so if somebody doesn't join them for one big fight, then maybe they'll still be willing to help with the next one that you have right around the corner. But this is also something that can really help distinguish what makes an NPC different from an adventurer. Sure, the NPCs want to help, especially if the world is in danger or it's some other good cause, but they're also NPCs for a reason. There has to be some reason why they aren't running around themselves solving the problems that the adventurers solve. In the aftermath of a big battle, you can highlight this. You'd have a beloved NPC say, "Yeah, that was awful. I don't think I could do that again." You don't necessarily need to go so far as to demonstrate actual trauma the NPC has experienced, although You certainly could, if that's a subject that you and your group really want to explore and you're comfortable doing so in a way that doesn't make it feel cheap or reductive. But I've always believed that it takes a certain kind of crazy to become an adventurer, throwing themselves into danger over and over again, either for a good cause or just because you really, really want that sweet loot. Either way, I think it's reasonable to assume that most NPCs are not wired the same way. NPCs have limits as to what they're willing to go through, so they might just have to bow out to the next big adventure. And then maybe further down the campaign, when the situation is dire enough and the whole world is in jeopardy, the universe is in jeopardy, those NPCs are willing to put aside their reluctance for that big final fight. But they're not going to do that for every individual mission because that's just too much for them. We actually had this experience in my Curse of Strahd campaign. As I mentioned earlier, the Amber Temple was a bloodbath, and a lot of NPCs died in battle in only the second session of the temple. And the party was in the temple for something like 10 sessions, most of that time with very few NPC allies remaining. But when that story arc was done and the NPCs were revived, all of them were like, yeah, that sucked. I'm going back to town. You can come and get me when it's time for the Strahd fight, but until then, I'm gonna cool my heels. That's not a direct quote, you understand. But the NPCs did this for two reasons. First of all, the NPCs were getting to be a lot for our group to keep track of. Not only were they going to make it a challenge for me to challenge the party, but it also led to a lot of bookkeeping for everyone. Made it hard for the party to sneak anywhere with such a large group, and we'd also just forget about some of these characters for a good long while. It was tough for me to remember these characters and roleplay all of them throughout the session because we just had so many of them. But also, narratively, having the NPCs leave served the story because these allies wanted to help the heroes, but then a bunch of them got murdered and resurrected. And so, yeah, they didn't necessarily want to go through that again. They still make an exception for that final boss fight against Strahd, but before that time comes, they were not going to go on every mission with the party. And frankly, I think this is essential because something we haven't discussed yet is the fact that the heroes have other ways to bring NPC allies into battle that you can't control or regulate, and where they will always want these allies right alongside them in battle, in initiative, fighting the main forces. The ranger might have an animal companion, and some other classes can summon a bunch of allies through magic spells or subclass features. You think it's tough to track NPCs in combat? Try a druid summoning 8 wolves with conjure animals. Now imagine you're running a game for 4 druids. And remember, that was the 2014 conjure animals, none of this new version where you summon a large pack of intangible animals in a single space that deals 3d10 slashing damage if the target fails a dex save. This was the full bookkeeping of adding a shitload of velociraptors to the battlefield. Or take a magic item like the Horn of Valhalla, where you can create a bunch of spectral berserkers. I ran a game once where it was a vampire and 2 Nothics versus a warlock, a sorcerer, a fighter, and 8 berserkers summoned with that horn. And don't get me wrong, that vampire still owned in combat. It was brutal as hell.
So that is 20 necrotic damage, and your hit point max is dropped by 20, and it regains 20. It also regains 20 at the top of its turn because she's a super vampire. So she just got 40 hit points back.
Out of game, how do you break a grapple? Like, can you run up and like rip someone off?
And this one actually, ordinarily it's a contest. This one there is an escape DC.
Well, I'm down to 62 hit points, and my max health went down from 128 to now 108.
Just a little bit above me.
Yep.
Hey, come down to my level.
And that's fucking permanent?
Until you take a long rest.
Okay.
Unless it's the final long rest that we all will take.
Thank you for clarifying, Mike.
I'm glad you did that.
But the bookkeeping of trying to keep track of the placement of a bunch of berserkers and who had acted and how much damage they had all done was a lot. And I wasn't even keeping track of their damage or their hit points or anything like that. The player was. But that's my point. You and the players are already going to have a lot to keep track of during combat, and more so as they level up and get more cool stuff. And so I do think it's a ton of fun to recruit NPC allies for a fight, but I also think you should learn from some of my mistakes and not allow your players to add semi-permanent members to their party by recruiting NPCs to travel with them indefinitely. NPC allies are a fun tool in your toolkit, not just to help keep fights interesting and dynamic, but also to reflect the status that PCs have obtained in the world by demonstrating what favors they're able to call in. But like anything else you can do in your games to mix things up a little bit, you don't want to overuse it or it'll feel less special and just wind up adding to the complexity of your game for very little reward. Still, it is fun to do sometimes, and there are going to be a ton of upcoming episodes of Critical Role Demystified. We're going to point back to this video as a good guideline for how to capture some of these same iconic moments that we're going to see in their game, and how to make them happen in our own. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date with all my latest videos. And if you're able to support the channel financially, check out my Patreon or my Ko-fi or become a YouTube member. Join my Discord server to hang out with other awesome people and sign up for my newsletter to hear my updates. And if you're in the US, check your voter registration. Sometimes things get a little goofy, and this is going to be an important election, so just make sure. All those links are in the doobly-doo below. I talked about some of my Curse of Strahd mistakes, but you can learn more about the mistakes I made when prepping that game by clicking this video, where I purge some of my unnecessary notes. Until next time, play fair and have fun. Oh, I almost forgot. Okay, they're alive again. You're welcome.